In the last video, we talked about economic growth. Now we're going to talk about some objections to my argument that things have been getting a lot better. So yeah, economic growth, fine. But it's just that the rich are getting richer. All right, so this picture shows us a graph of extreme poverty. So this is absolute poverty. It's the number of people living on less than $2 a day, measured in, I believe, 2000. It says there in very small print, measured in, oh no, it doesn't say it. But it's measured in, like, say, $2,000. So $2 a day. How many people in the world are living at that level of income? Okay, so the black is the population living in extreme poverty. And the gray is the population not living in extreme poverty. All right, so what you can see is, not surprisingly, the total world population, that's the two lines together. So that's this top graph here. This is total world population. If I just kind of draw the upper contour set, that's total world population. You won't be surprised that the world population has grown very quickly, and in particular after 1960 it really started exploding. This is actually looks very close to exponential growth, doesn't it? At the same time, the number of people living in absolute poverty, it's increasing up to about 1970, and then basically falling since then, and falling quite dramatically. So if you look at as a fraction of total population, the population living in absolute poverty in 2018 or 17, whenever this last statistic is calculated, is probably, just eyeballing it, I'm going to say around 12%, something between 10 and 15% of the total world population. So that's total population. This is about 15%, I would say. Whereas over here, now you can't see because I drew on top of it, but nearly everyone was living in absolute poverty in 1820. So, I mean, this hasn't just been the rich getting richer, it's also been the poorest getting richer as well over this period. And then now here's another way of looking at it. So this is the fraction of world population living at extreme poverty, so it's the same thing. And again, here in 1820, it's 90%, and then here in 2018, it's, looks like I was even estimating a little high, it looks like it's about 10% of the world population. And then it looks like here I missed a slide. All right, yeah, so fine, okay, so the poor are getting richer as well, but that's because they're working at sweatshops, right? I mean, their quality of life is just super low. They might be richer, but they have a terrible time of it. Well, it turns out that in many ways, actually child labor has been decreasing since the 1850s. So this is the percentage of children that are engaged in labor. And you can see that we don't have such good data here. So, you know, we have England going back to 1850. Italy goes back to 1880. The United States goes back to 1880. And we can look at, and we can see that in every country where we're measuring it in this period, it's decreasing. And of course, you know, if you would follow this now, the number of children engaged in labor in the United States, Italy, and England is almost zero these days. The world, we don't have a measurement overall until 1950, at which time around 25% of all children in the world are engaged in labor. Kind of crazy. But that's falling as well. And it looks like it's been falling even further into the 2000s. So, I mean, that's one measure of sweatshop is child labor. That seems to be decreasing as time has gone by. What about occupational deaths, right? Sweatshops, hazardous, unpleasant working conditions. Well, it turns out that actually that's been falling as well. This is the deaths per 100,000 workers per year in the world. And you can see that this is falling very quickly, getting very close to, you know, some very low level 5, say. You know, there's some limit to how far you can go there. And that's on the workplace. But certainly work has become less dangerous. I mean, over time, since 1910, if you look at that picture. Okay, yeah, so it's true that the poor are better off, but the rich are fabulously better off, right? So inequality is growing. Well, first of all, let's see what the next picture is before I make this point. Yeah, if you think about inequality in the world, right? I mean, it's definitely true that that's going to rise over time. So here, this is a Gini index. If you don't know what the Gini is, we actually should talk about that maybe. I think I'll do a little video about the Gini index after this video. That's a measure of inequality. The higher it is, the more unequal the distribution is. And it's bounded between 0 and 1. So what you see here is that, sure enough, 1820, the world was a lot more equal than it was in 1950, dramatically so. But then, after 1950, actually, it seems like things are getting more equal again. And if you think about it, what's causing this is that in 1820, the entire world is poor. Everybody was poor. And then what happened was some countries became richer, and then over here, the poor countries started catching up, in particular China. So this gray line is based on one country is an observation, so that's one country, one observation. And over here, this is one person, one observation. So they're different, right? Because some countries have more people in them than others. So especially when we look at this one, you can see that inequality is actually decreasing when we think about the income of the people in the world. And that's just because basically China in particular, and also India, have become much richer over the last 20 years. So here actually inequality has been decreasing recently as the poor countries have caught up. You know, China's been growing at 10% a year, and the United States has only been growing at 2% a year, so, or Denmark too. So that explains that. If we look within countries, you know, for some countries we can look very, very far back in time. So in the US and England, we can see that actually inequality was quite high in the 17th century and in the 18th century. It dropped down here into the 1950s, 60s, and 70s, and then it's risen again since then. So you might say, why is this? Gee, this looks very similar to this elephant curve we're going to talk about soon, I think. The reason why is because basically here you had a bunch of peasants that were absolutely poor, and then you had some aristocracy that was much, much wealthier. So, you know, that distribution is going to look like this. It's going to have a big hump of people that are poor, and it's going to have a tiny number of people that are rich. And that's going to be a very unequal distribution of wealth. Everybody got richer here, but then, as you well know, and it's been well documented in both the United States and the UK, inequality has risen a lot recently. So here's this kind of making the point again. This is now world. Now we're looking at world, the distribution of wealth. And in 1800 or 1900, 1975, what's happening is in 1800, everybody is poor. So this is, you know, this is the level for absolute poverty. So in 1800, almost everybody is poor, right? In 1975, well, there you've got a bunch of poor countries, but there's also a few rich countries over here, right? And then in 2015, now almost everybody's rich. There's just still a few little poor countries over here. So that's what's happening. This double hump shape is kind of the takeoff of a few rich countries, and then the poor countries catching up. This is this famous elephant curve of Branko Milanovic, which shows that if you look at the gain in income, in real income, between 1988 and 2008, basically there was a large gain among people that were poorer. This is the percentile of the global income distribution, so as we go this way, people are getting richer. So what's happening is that as time went by, the people that were sort of very poor, but not the poorest, right? This is like people in, like, say, Mali or Congo, places that have a lot of issues in sub-Saharan Africa. They saw their income grow a lot. The people that were the wealthiest, right? That's up here. This is the people that are the wealthiest. These guys saw their income grow a lot. It was these people here that were sort of wealthy but not that wealthy. They hardly saw their incomes grow at all, only 10%. This is like working class, middle class in rich countries. This is like the rich in rich countries, and then this is the poor in poor countries. Or I should say the middle income / poor in poor countries. So that's what's going on. All right, so I think this video is getting pretty long, so I'm going to stop right here. And we'll talk about the next slide in the next video.